This is AV SuperFriends On Topic, a 30-minute monthly roundtable focused on a single topic. This discussion will be opinionated, to the point, and saturated with our well-known blend of painfully won expertise and deeply ingrained immaturity. For November 2021, it's the AV SuperFriends On Topic. Welcome back, everybody. Time for another Friday afternoon podcast adventure. It's Fridays. We like Fridays because it's the end of the week. We're going to do a podcast, and then some of us go home and some of us go back to work, depending on where we're located or what we're doing. So my name's Chris Dector. I'm joined today by Justin, Marc, Jamie, and Larry. And this month's topic is AV over IP. You guys heard of this thing? Actually, maybe AVoIP. We're not really sure how you pronounce that.
Yeah, I didn't think you were not pronouncing it correctly.
AVoIP.
And this is a topic that we discussed on one of our shows on Off the Rails back in, I think it was October, and we kind of went into depth on that. And we think, well, this is a good opportunity to revisit it because it's certainly not going anywhere. But it's what we're going to do today is we're really going to get kind of in the weeds on this. We're going to get into kind of some of the nuts and bolts of how we're doing AV over IP on our campuses and you know where we see it going. And I'm probably the last show, if you go back and listen, it was more of kind of like, well, we're trying it out, we're seeing some things, and we see some places where it can go. But we kept it kind of high level. So I think our intention here is to really get kind of into the technical bits and bobs of what we're doing with AV over IP, and we'll talk about switches and configurations and all that fun stuff. So normally this is where I would say, but first we're going to do the news, but we don't have a news segment. We're going to go right into this.
No news.
No news at all. There is nothing to discuss.
How it was yesterday.
There's this big show next week. Have you heard about it?
Yeah, so by the time you're listening to the show, it already happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
really
wait, there was
germane.
this big show that just happened? Did any of y'all hear about that?
Well, there's another big show this week that AV SuperFriends will also be at.
That's a good point. Thank you, Larry. So Larry and I will be in person in Pittsburgh at EdSpaces on November 4th, I believe. November 3rd, 4th, and 5th is the EdSpaces conference. So any of you in Pittsburgh with nothing better to do, come on down and see us, and we'll see how well an OwlCam works in a multimodal Zoom hybrid environment over conference
it's going to be great.
Center Wi-Fi.
It's going to be awesome.
It's the perfect environment.
Yeah, it's a hacked OwlCam. It's been
we're basically it's one of those conferences where we're going to be there to talk about technology integration, but the vast majority of people there are architects and furniture vendors and facility managers, and so we're kind of coming at it from a different perspective, and it's deliberate to kind of really throw a wrench into things. So we'll see how that goes. So if you're in Pittsburgh or you're within driving distance or you have airline miles you want to use, EdSpaces, ed-spaces.com is the place to be. All right. So AV over IP, you guys, we were talking about this before the show, and Jamie just started launching into something. We had to get him to be quiet because he will use up all his show information before the show actually starts recording. But I think we're kind of all over the place, right? I think we would agree that we all have a general, the same general approach where we're getting into this and recognizing this is certainly the transport of the future for all the reasons we've discussed in the past, as far as flexibility and capability and all that fun stuff. But where the rubber meets the road, or where the content meets the network, is with those network configurations. So why don't we start with the Wild Wild West? Justin, how well is AV over IP working for you at the WKU campus?
It depends which AV over IP you're talking about.
Not Zoom. Let's not talk about Zoom.
So not Zoom and not Netflix, right, or Disney Plus, but we're talking Dante right now specifically. And what we were instructed to do was, put these Dante mics on the WKU network, and mainly for Zoom rooms. We have implemented these microphones right when they came out years ago. Worked with our networking group, put in a QSys core behind it, and they gave us a little appliance switch to put in our AV rack, and it's been great. It's worked great. We haven't had support tickets on it. People use it all the time. It's a conference room. At the time, I described it as, kind of AES 67-ish. I didn't really mention Dante. Not sure if that had anything to do with it or not. And here we are today, where the networking group is troubleshooting network dropouts on our microphones. So we're, getting the tickets into AVS support group, and those tickets are then, I guess, somehow communicated to the networking group, and they are troubleshooting. And we put the Dante microphone directly on the network in all of our Zoom rooms to alleviate upfront equipment cost. And now we're kind of looking at what is that total cost of ownership? Are you going to look at how many classes have been interrupted with this, or are we just looking at our own time of troubleshooting for total cost of ownership? How many people now are involved with the time of dealing with this problem? And this could have been maybe fixed with a few extra $100, maybe a Dante to USB adapter and a local 5-port PoE network switch and the lectern. And it's that whole thing of do we need to do AV over IP? What does AV over IP mean?
Do you need to put it on the network?
On the network
is what I'm hearing right now. Is like you're questioning, does it need to be there?
And also, does it need to be Dante in a lot of these rooms? And a lot of these rooms are super small, and we have a standard Zoom room package that includes the MXA 910. So that's kind of what we're putting in everywhere to make all the rooms the same, right? And so there's better ways to do this to lower the total cost of ownership. I don't know currently where things stand exactly. I just know that people are doing stuff behind the scenes and trying to figure it out. So kind of the premise of all of this is, I believe, and this is getting into the weeds of the networking group and the philosophy of, resources and resource management and things like that. They don't like to do a lot of special configurations because of various reasons, which I get, right? I mean, we don't want a bunch of special AV systems out there that we have to support that are all one-offs. But at the same time, got to follow those rules that Dante put out to an extent if you are going to put it on the network, right? So that's kind of where we are with Dante for Zoom room specific situations. And we also have other very large systems that are running QSIS over VLANs and running other things on VLANs that we've worked with networking on. It's just this one thing where, we tested it on what we call our South Campus, which doesn't have a lot of people out there, which the network traffic is probably super low. And it tested fine after we got the dual MAC address figured out, and registering those dual MACs with their network and getting all that situated. Oh, look, it works. Let's go ahead and deploy it. And then,
get some people hanging out on wireless, and all of a sudden everything goes sideways on you, huh?
Yeah. So the lesson learned there for everyone, I think, is, and a lot of us know this, we test things in front of people. You don't test things in a sandbox and don't invite people to come out and try it. You don't put things in a sandbox and test it for a week and say it's good, right? So that's kind of also something that happened.
Well, I think to take the devil's advocate there, a lot of times as an AV group, we do test things in a sandbox. We want to make sure the technology works well. But the problem is we're interfacing with the enterprise network that is already in place, that's already full production. And it's like, if we have to test on that, there is no room to fail. It's going to go down in front of everybody.
Well, I mean, even if a network configuration is the same and use the same network switches all across campus, the makeup of the network is not the same. If I plug in a server serving up all kinds of illegal videos on there's things that you can plug up to networks to cause them not to operate at full capacity, right? So networks like change Dante. As or HDBaseT.
You do that.
You plug in an HDBaseT to the wall and see what happens. So there's a lot of variables to this. There's a lot of things happening, but that's kind of where we are with our Zoom rooms right now.
Wow. So things are going well is what I hear. Everything's working well.
Everything works fine.
Yeah.
Just don't look at it.
It works when you don't need it, but not when you do. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. Yeah, pretty much.
And Justin, I'm guessing that any sort of additional kind of network-related troubleshooting is generally done when those classes aren't in session, and you're like, well, it's working fine now. So what's the heck?
See, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where our support group had to bring the network engineers to the room and show them and, set up like basically a talk box with their iPhone and listen to the audio drop out. And I don't know if they're Wiresharking the ports yet. I don't know what level they're getting to at this point. But again, this could be solved by probably less than $500 in some labor.
So there's a couple things I heard in that, when you were going on there, is that one, you brought up the term Dante, and then you also brought up the term AES67, right? And you said one had considerable more traction than the other.
Maybe.
And
we know how it
one
played
sounds
out.
more like a standard, and one sounds like a rock and roll term.
Possibly. Or maybe it's a manufacturer thing that they thought instead of I don't know what you call a pseudo standard, maybe a standard. Is it a standard? I guess sort of.
I would say it's a standard, but it's not an open standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's, we know it as a standard. I think QSIS is a standard.
One was designed for enterprise architecture. One was designed for people with ponytails and Sharpies and go where I want badges.
I don't know if that's fair so much as to say that one was specifically designed to provide limited interoperability, as long as the proprietary standard, the Dante standard, was playing nice. Kind of like with HDBaseT.
It was designed to be easy.
It's designed to be interoperable to a certain extent.
But that ease of operations doesn't necessarily fall into the best practices of an enterprise network.
Or even just, I think, not even best practice, much to say it doesn't always fall into the real world applications.
Right. And so I think that's where kind of things going sideways. So to me, it's like the conversation is really around what is the true protocol standard? What are we actually doing? And getting that engagement at the network engineering level and having that honest conversation to really fix it. Instead of just being like these high level, like colloquial names of things that are working.
Yeah. If you just break it down, you're okay. We start up a project, build a Zoom room, and our cabling group has to pull these extra cables all the way to the MDF or IDF just to get audio from the ceiling location in the room that you're in to the lectern location in the room that you are in. So from just looking at it at a upfront cost, it's more expensive doing that time material, right, than it is to put in a $60 PoE plus network switch that's unmanaged and a $250 Dante to USB device or whatever they cost, $300, $350, something where I don't know. Nonetheless, it's fairly inexpensive to solve this problem.
But this is kind of very analogous to a lot of the AV over IP conversation, and I think, or AVoIP for those who can't understand what I'm saying, that you described like this pseudo secondary network, right? Within an enterprise solution, you have like your core network, and now you're like, well, this doesn't play well over here. Let me just go re-engineer my own little thing over here, and therein lies that weird sticky point of why does it not work in enterprise network, and how do we make it work on the enterprise network, and does that reduce the replication of services that you're kind of talking about right now? So so it sounds like it's not quite converged to where we would like it to be.
It's crashing converged, and so you also have to think about,
converging, and you can't stop it.
Yeah, you have to think about what this Zoom room computer is doing, because we have two computers in the lectern, right? One's the Zoom codec, if you will, and the other's the computer that people use. And so this Zoom room computer is controlling the on and off of displays. It's receiving multiple streams or flows of Dante from possibly multiple microphones. I think you can add, it's ridiculous, I think you can add 7 MXA 910s directly to a Zoom room without a DSP. You just drop down the box, like, I don't know, I think it's more than 4. So I'm,
well, if they're operating in this single, you get that single mix down channel from them.
Sure. But still, with all the other, and plus you're doing a Zoom call on that computer, it's that computer is doing a lot of stuff, and we've ITized, if you will, the AV design of what a Zoom room, well, should be, I guess, or shouldn't be. I don't know.
Let me ask this question to the group: Why? Why AV over IP? Now, I'm just playing the role here. Just follow along. So, at what point do you see that cost benefit to do that? Is it to play well in others' domain, or do you literally see the cost benefit from a parts and pieces and configuration? Because right now it seems like you have like a higher total cost of ownership from what you just described when you're actually trying to get this on like a converged enterprise network.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think about how easy this system was to put
on
in.
paper,
I mean, you just,
right? Yeah.
Drop down box, click, check. Oh, look, we got a Zoomy Zoom going. Right. Yay.
Chris, you and I talk about this a lot. Like, at what point does it make that sense to say, okay, I'm at a point where it makes sense to be in a true AV over IP experience? And so maybe if we pivot away from Dante and say, let's talk about, let's bring video into this. Yeah, in general.
So I'm at that point right now. So I have the opportunity, not the opportunity, I have the absolute and utter requirement and charge from leadership to revisit current campus standards for what a classroom space includes, what it involves, and how it's built and designed. Again, from the end user standpoint, they don't care. They're going to have a lectern and a touch panel and a dock cam and all the rest. But so we get to look at these newer technologies that, hey, HDBaseT has been great. That's been really solid for, almost 10 years now. There's no issues there. But there's newer technologies and newer ways of doing this, leveraging a lot of, different infrastructure. And in the past, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, sort of thing, start looking at AV over IP versus, baseband video or point-to-point HDBaseT, limited access transport sort of thing. And the cost wasn't the cost delta was too big. It didn't line up apples to apples unless you had a special use case or you had a very complex space or a very simple space that you wanted to tie in for into the larger campus network or something. But now, if you look at the way things look at the cost model, the way things are kind of lining up for, I need transmitters and I need encoders and decoders, not transmitters and receivers, but functionally the same thing.
I think a different name on some other
different name on these things. Functionally, the general layout is the same, but that cost delta has almost disappeared. And what it gets me, at least, and this is just my general concept here, what it gets me is flexibility. Even though I have no plans right now to say, I can send, content from this room to that room, or I can do overflow for special events or something. But if I design my systems to all be capable of doing so, and it's not a hardware change, it's now a software change, because they're all tying back to the building network. And of course, we've got appropriate VLAN configurations and topology and network topology set up that way. So we actually have a pretty robust network. Then it kind of makes sense to be like, well, if the difference is 5 or 10%, why not? Because it gains you all these things. And if we don't use any of it, as those costs continue to come down, instead of doing, the old school method of say, I'm just going to throw this out there. Say I needed an 8x8 matrix system or something like that. You have a big chassis and a lot of input cards and things doing it that way. Well, now I can do the same sort of thing with commodity switching. And, just that goes straight into the network, and I need network drops to go to the appropriate location sort of thing. But I get that advanced capability potential. Maybe not that need isn't there. Maybe not that absolute requirement is there, but the potential is there. And like I said, it's a software configuration, not a hardware configuration. So why the heck not? And to Justin's earlier comment, a lot of these things we're starting to see don't even require those hardware encoders and decoders. You can do it straight in software from the computers. So eventually, in fact, Jamie, you're doing this right now, or at least you have plans to do this right now. Just like, I'm going to drop these computers straight in with super high bandwidth right into the system, so I don't need that extra little box there even to do that. So it's starting to. There's a lot of, I think, maybe we're still early on this, but I think there's a lot of potential, maybe 2-3 years down the road on this sort of thing. So it's the time is right. So I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I've been, and this is something where I've been really hesitant, and a lot of it was that cost delta of the idea of 1-to-1-to-1-to-1-to-1. For every device I have to have an encoder and then a decoder, and I gave that up. I'm like, no, so I have a traditional switching system within, the podium rack or whatever for all of the different activities, and then I will have like a transmitter and a bunch of receivers. because now I do get that most of the time when you're sharing to another room, right? It's the receiving end that you want. You know, you can pre-switch it and send it. Now, I went a little crazy recently. Instead of buying some of the more well-known AV over IP AVoIP systems, I decided we're going to do this all with NDI. I am a lucky AV person on a campus that my network engineers, they don't mind. They experiment with my stuff all the time. They basically, if I say, hey, I kind of need this VLAN to do this thing, and here's what I'm trying to do, as long as I can. Now, I've found that it's a lot easier to ask them for those things when I find the little white paper, the little network cheat sheet that the manufacturers give you that says, this is exactly what we're looking at, whether they're jumbo frames or not jumbo frames or securities or this, or as we were talking about earlier with Dante and A67, in my case, one of them was AVB. If you just call it AVB, they're like, I don't know. But if you say AVB TSN, blah, 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 and they're like, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Done. You're in.
Oh, the
right?
Canadian Sports Network. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. And then, so we get through all of that, and I put NDI on there, but I did it for a second reason too, is that a lot of my inputs and outputs of that particular system were cameras. It was a lot of cameras to the back to the computer, and then to other places. And I put that in place just in case the Zooms, the Teams, the whatevers, the software-based codecs just aren't, they change. Something happens. They just break. Chances are my network from campus to campus is still going to be intact, even if some server somewhere in Siberia goes down, or a software update breaks something. And the whole idea was that, well, I can take NDI. The networking folks understand what that is, and I can have it routed over the fiber traffic to this other campus directly. I don't have to do anything strange. I don't have to do anything weird. There are some downsides to that we get into some other day, but that's when I really started to do AV over IP. I've been doing AVB for a while, Dante for a while, but when I really started dropping the video on there, I've tried a bunch of things, but most of mine is pre-switch it. The receivers, even if you use HDBaseT, monitors and a lot of some projectors you can go straight in, but a lot of monitors and a lot of antiquated projectors don't have HDBaseT, so you got to have a receiver anyway. So what's the difference between an AV over IP receiver and an HDBaseT one? Nothing. And then I can still route it over the rest of the network. But as far as the network's concerned, I'm just lucky. Like I have a managed switch in every one of my systems that goes back to the core that's managed by professional networking folks who give me the VLANs and the access necessary to keep it secure and yet flexible.
So
a lot of people don't get that.
Here's my question, Jamie, is in your setup, so you get a phone call, something's not working, that managed switch that's in your rack or lectern, is that something that networking provides as a supported solution, or is that something you recommended and you buy in your solution? Which way is that? Because I got a follow-up question to that.
Yeah. I don't specify network switches for the University of Missouri Kansas City systems. I don't. I call the network folks and I say, hey, folks, I'd say guys, but that's not true. But I say, hey, look, I'm doing this thing. I want to put an 8 or a 12 or a 16 port switch into my system, but I need it. I need things accessible. I need the computer to be accessible by the desktop support people. I need my stuff accessible to me. I need the VLANs all there. And they say, hey, this is the one that we recommend. We're going to buy it for you. We're going to configure it for you. We'll just hand it over to you. You put it in. Once we put it in and have that uplink, we're good to go. And so 90% of the time, when there's an issue with my equipment, we troubleshoot our equipment first, because 90% of the time, it's something stupid we've done, not that they've done. And then when they need to, they just log in and take care of it. They're like, oh, whoops, we forgot to trunk that, right? And it's done with a few keystrokes. But they take care of all that, and that way it just lives happily on their infrastructure. They take care of software updates. They take care of all the certificates. I am a spoiled brat when it comes to networking. Now, let me ask
this question. This is getting into the weeds a little bit, and this might be a stupid question. So you got that switch in your lectern, and that cable leaves your lectern and hits the wall, right?
Sometimes, yes.
Where else would it go? Like floor box, or I guess, or?
Well, there are times where we take it straight back to the distribution. So it's basically a hard pipe all the way to it, yeah. But
so you're not even patching, but so we've got all these ports on the wall. So an argument we get is, what if the user plugs the wrong cable into the wrong port after they unplug things?
That the port is set up just like another access port. It's only looking for that switch.
Well, that's a different question, Mark.
So when you plug in,
that question right now,
yeah, it's a routed switch port, and it is looking for. They have whatever mumbo jumbo they do, because it's just starting to get into, I don't know. Okay. Whatever they do, if I just take my computer to the wall and I unplug that switch and I plug in the computer, I get nothing.
Got
Zero.
Yep.
If I use my link runner,
works. Different set of IP block.
Yeah.
Yeah, it only
it's
works.
Also looking specifically for that
network switch.
That's a worry on our campus. Is, well, what if they plug it? We don't, if you VLAN this and don't VLAN that, and you got multiple ports and plug. So yeah, that's right.
They have whatever management tool they use. We're all Cisco, and everything they give us is Cisco, and it all ties back into their management portal. And however they set up the management systems for these switches, they've made it so that if it's not a switch on the end of that cable and it's not the right MAC address, you're not getting anywhere.
Got it. So you have the backups to those switches, or they provide the spares for those switches? Like if one needs to be swapped out, how does that workflow happen?
We have a few on the shelf. We take it over and just set it up. Yeah.
Yep.
We have a couple, but again, they provide it all.
Yeah. So that's even if I have
if I have my 8-port die, I call them up and they say, "Well, we got this 24 on the wall. We'll give it to you for a little while, and then whenever we get another 8-port, we'll put it in."
Yeah.
Again, spoiled. I'm spoiled, and I will admit that all day long. And I thank those guys every time we have to deal with them, because they make AV over IP easy for me. Mm-hmm. I can reach everything from my house. I can get to anything. And the reverse of that is, so can they. And if something's misbehaving, I mean, when you worked with me, we had a misbehaving AVB system, right? And they basically said, "Oh yeah, it's that port," and they shut it down. Right.
Before that, we had a problem with the building-wide AVB system that networking caused. So, it is a two-way street.
To me, we have varying versions of this scenario that exist. And the question I always ask is, when does it make sense for me to force all the traffic out of the four walls of the immediate classroom? And why should I do that? If I can manage it and my classroom's plumbed right now because we did an HDBaseT infrastructure and I can quickly convert it, I don't have to move all of that.
But Mark, I'm not sending my traffic out. I have a switch in the lectern.
That's fine. Yeah, if you're plumbed that way, I can. There's kind of this difference I'm seeing. There's
I think
bandwidth on the backplane of the switch or bandwidth on my own switch.
Well, and you're also kind of looking at if we're doing AV over IP like layer 1 style, then I need 8 ports on the wall, and I'm going to fire every device into the wall, and that's a different thing. And holy crap, I would never suggest that.
But I think that's what's being asked of Justin right now.
Well, it's kind of wanting to move that way, where we're having less boxes as much as possible in the rooms and having the already existing MDFs and IDFs manage everything. And that's where I think a lot of people think things should go. And that is going to cost a lot of money and a lot of time.
So, and a couple other little variants, like where I see this being used outside of our NVXs and our classrooms, our active learning rooms, lots of endpoints to and fro, and it's primarily localized on a local switch. We do our control to our campus network, but we're not forcing all that bandwidth outbound. But where we are leveraging it primarily is in the production fields right now, right? We're seeing a lot more of the vMixes, a lot more of the OBSs and things like that. And I have another facility where I have every camera coming over essentially SRT to our broadcast, and we can control those here via IP, really high quality, full HD. But again, we are leveraging actually campus network, but once it hits our workflow here, it now becomes on our switches within our space. And we don't ask it to share backplane of enterprise network if we don't need to. And then we polish it and then we'll send it back up to CDN accordingly.
Well, and I think that's fine. But I mean, even like when I have stuff hits a campus network, it hits a campus network on my VLAN. And we found out we did a campus-wide Wi-Fi controller upgrade a couple of weeks ago and found out that in some buildings, those were actually allowing people on Wi-Fi to talk to devices on my VLAN, and that took a bit of back and forth, and the network security guys figured it out, and like, so because it's like, that's my stuff. Yes, it's over the campus VLAN or over the campus network, but it's all still on my VLAN trunked appropriately, so I can send stuff back and forth, and it's on my stuff. But for the most part, AV over IP exists within the space, just like you said. It's basically at this point, I think we're nascent. It's very early days, and in general use, it works much like HDBaseT, kind of in a limited environment. So. But it does allow that, like you said, that outbound traffic is there. But once I'm working on it, or in the sense of a classroom, once I'm distributing it locally, it's all internal sort of thing.
So check this out. In our Zoom rooms, we have a data port, and this is all coming from the MDF or IDF. So you got the projector control, that's one data port. You've got the TV controls, that could be 2 or 3 additional
Justin, you guys
data
just
ports.
need to buy a Switch. I don't understand this. This is just weird.
This is nuts.
I know. This is just the rules that have been put in front of us. Well, then we got the computer, and then we got the iPad, which is the UI. Then you have the microphone. Then I think there's a total of 7 or 8 data ports required to run a Zoom room the way it's
this was
currently
asked
designed.
of us early on too. Now this is probably 10, 12 years ago. Well, how many ports do you need in a space? And we said, well, why? Well, if we're going to put everything on a network, we need to know how many ports you are. I'm like, yeah, but if I can also just have my own switch, I don't need to ask you for X hundreds of dollars per port to pull into your switches. And so there was a model at one point in time where they wanted everything on a known enterprise connected switch.
Yeah, it's layer 1 AV over IP. So.
Yeah, and so it's super expensive to do that.
And that's what really drove us to the relationship that we have now, because when I first started at this university, it wasn't as tied together. Of course, AV and internet wasn't, or network wasn't really tied together anyway. Just some control. But as we started increasing those numbers, like, well, now we need 4 data ports at $200 per port. And then we just said, hey, wait, now I need a 5th one. Well, it took labor, right, to pull another cable, to drop it in, to patch it out, to do all these things. And we started talking. I was like, okay, we want to switch. And of course, their first response was, well, hell no.
That's
no.
where we are.
And no.
Sort of,
and we said,
really,
well, hold on. What if we bought your switches instead of just the Best Buy ones? And they said, what? I said, your Cisco house. Give me a Cisco professional grade switch.
Yeah, just recommend a switch that you guys can support. We did the same thing here. So,
and they said,
Larry,
here
what
it
are you guys
is.
doing at UNCG?
Way to go.
How are you guys handling AV over IP there?
We're kind of going the opposite direction of Justin. And the reason why is when I came here, they did absolutely zero AV over IP. And so when I got here, I wanted to start them with Dante and start them with MVX and start them with some of this stuff, but I wanted to do it with less variables. And so I did go out and buy my own switches and use it as just a transport layer, just so we can get comfortable with the tools. Now that we've been playing with it for a year to, 18 months, we're at the point now that we're having those conversations with our enterprise network group. And it sounds like soon we might be in the Jamie situation where that we have that partnership. We're already talking about the new standard classroom. We're going to get 4 ports at the end of our managed switch just for Dante in every room. So if we choose to add a mic, it's already there. It's already set up. And that's the way we're going to go roll forward in the future. But I didn't want to try to roll that out and teach my guys about AV over IP at the exact same time. I needed a safe place to fail.
So how did you start that conversation with you? Like, because it sounds like it was a deliberate thing. You're like, hey, I can just go plug all this stuff in, but now it's going to be up to me. And they weren't doing any of it before I got here. So everything would be every issue would be my fault. So did you start the conversation with like, hey, I'm going to go talk with the networking guys. we're going to figure out our process first, and then we'll do some sandboxing and things. Or did you try it in a couple of spaces and then recognize, oh, I need to get these guys involved?
Well, because of my background, I do know a little bit about networking. So I was comfortable building my own networks regardless. And at some of the other universities I've been at, it was the networking group wasn't as collaborative. And so it was generally easier to get the purple switches or something and just do your own thing. So I wanted to get my guys up to speed. So it looked like they were comfortable. They knew what they were doing. And then luckily the eSports project came on at about the same time that I was starting these discussions. With the eSports, it is such a massive system that the entire thing is AV over IP. It had to be on the enterprise network. Like, we had to get them involved. And so that's opened up a lot of doors and a lot of communication that, okay, we've seen this works. You already know the standards. How about if we roll this out in active learning rooms, if we do this in other spaces across campus outside of the eSports venue now?
Larry, I have to just thank you for presenting a solution to my problem. All I have to do is build an esports arena now.
Seriously, you'll be surprised all the doors that open.
And everything just opens up, and it's this like unicorns and rainbow shit and all this stuff, and everything's
Justin,
great.
Remember though, Larry's esports arena is pretty much only exists because they went all the way to the chancellor, whose kid is a gamer, and that kind of helped open that door. So you need to get a new chancellor who has
with a kid gamer,
kids who are gamers, that he respects that, and then start that conversation.
That's a lot of variables, Chris. I don't know if I can do that.
I'll tell you, I really learned in this last project with all of the NDI traffic and AVB and then the regular network traffic. You take for granted that a gigabit port to your computer is awesome, right? We take that for granted.
Oh yeah.
And then you start really, myself personally, I take it for granted. Like, like the switches we have are awesome. Most of them are 10G or better, but I got 1G to every computer, 1G NIC in every computer. I'm golden. And then you start doing the math. Yeah. And you're like, wait, holy smokes. If I'm running all of this stuff,
that's
I'm 900 megs into this gig.
That's my point.
And I have to be really on purpose about how I am routing these things. Because I am going straight to the machine for many of my activities, just like Justin. And I really take it for granted that a NIC, a gigabit NIC isn't necessarily always enough.
Nope.
And I have found recently that it is much more difficult for me to, on the production side, to Marc's point, if I have, 6 streams of NDI coming in, plus the audio channels, whatever transport it is, plus 2 or 3 going out, and Zoom, well, you can put multiple NICs on your computer, except that my newest fight is the desktop people are, whoa, hold on. You want how many NICs in this? And so it's been a different argument in that regards. And
I bet.
And because I'm not, it all rolls into that AV over IP. It's really easy to think, well, Zoom rooms or Team rooms or even just OBS, right? I'm using free OBS with NDI on these VLANs. And all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I just maxed out my NIC. So I'm having a bigger fight with the desktop support people, because when you start putting multiple NICs with multiple connections onto the network, it becomes a security issue. And some of our Windows firewalls and things say absolutely not. They don't want you to be able to have access to multiple VLANs, because I have an NDI VLAN, I have, and the regular campus network VLAN, and they don't want you to bridge those in the machine. And so it's just knocked off. So that's been a new interesting wrinkle to AV over IP that I thought about but didn't, because it's never been a problem until I did it. And then I was like, whoa, I got to find a solution for this.
To me, the way you get there is what you just said. Like, you were extremely intentional. Here's the numbers. Here's what's going on. And I think that's been the theme with all things that convert to digital. When we think about like build analog audio day, analog console, you can cheat that thing and have some success real easily. Get a new digital console put in front of you, it doesn't do anything until you ask it. So you have to be very intentional with your network folks and ask them and say, this is what I want to do. Here's why I'm doing it. Here's how to do it the best way, and interact with them. And then that might be a little bit unnerving for a lot of folks to want to do AV over IP, is that you're going to need to go engage with network engineers, as thorny as some of them may be. You will have to have that conversation, but be very intentional. Have the standards, have the numbers, have all that stuff, and let them help you engineer that.
Yeah, what's funny is, we do have an appliance-based thing that we use in our lecterns, and it's ASA 5505 from Cisco that is not made anymore, and we're still trying to hang on to them because we have probably over 100 of them in our lecterns. So, that's I feel like we were at a point 5 years ago when AV over IP was new. We're, talking with the networking group, kind of like what you're doing, Larry, and they're giving us switches, and it was a two-way street, and things were going pretty well. Oh, well, you just need a switch for Dante. Here it is. Just don't plug it up to our network. Okay, yeah, whatever. We can do that. Break it out USB. And now they're pushing more towards, like we talked about, everything going to the MDF or IDF as much as possible.
So Jamie, you mentioned something there about being very intentional in your selection of switches. And I want to bring that up with everybody and kind of like what switches we like. But first, Marc's going to push an all-important button.
As many of you know, the Super Friends have always been better received when we have more input from you. So, here's your chance. Send us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and get involved with the show. We're looking for some topics to discuss, some fellow nerds to talk to, or just general AV awesomeness to brag about. But remember, we'll probably steal your ideas. And I suppose we'd take some criticism, but that wouldn't be very nice. Anyway, drop us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and find out how quickly we ask you to join this nonsense.
So for our last little segment here, our wrap up, we're going to do a lightning round here. We're going to go around everybody, and the question is, hey, you're putting in a new classroom, a new event space, a new lecture hall, whatever it might be, a new multi-purpose space, and you're going to do it AV over IP. What is your go-to line or your go-to brand of switches, or what do you like? Where do you start that investigation as far, or do you just have one that I'm using this one all day long because it's great? So, Justin, why don't you go first?
So we are in the middle of trying to figure out that replacement for that ASA 5505 appliance that we have. And, we're looking at Luxel and Netgear for some of those. I know I've designed with very successful rates other systems outside of WKU using Netgear switches and Luxel, and that's been great. Just don't use a Luxel switch with AVB and everything's fine.
I'm pretty loyal. I don't get to spec switches that go on our network, but in a previous life and other places, I've been able to specify switches, and one of them was for a large performance auditorium where I had a switch at the stage, a switch in the sound booth, and I was connecting the two over fiber. And this was over Christmas break. One of the engineers actually came down and helped me set up both switches to make sure it works. So for that, anytime I can put extreme switches in, I will put extreme switches in just because of the customer service.
Cool.
Interesting. Well, like I said earlier, our campus it's a Cisco campus, and that's who the backbone is. And the switches that we've been purchasing lately have been the Catalyst, the 3560s, the 3680, whatever, right? 3850s. And we started with 8 ports and then 12 ports. And now, most recently, they've started purchasing me the Cisco C1000. It's still in the Catalyst line. And it's a 16-port switch and a half rack size. And it provides enough PoE. And this is the one I'm using with NDI and with... I don't really run AVB through it. AVB goes directly back to the AVB switch, which again is a Cisco, but it's a bigger unit. It's a more powerful unit. But in the desk, I've been using the C1000s, and I gotta say, again, they spec it for me. They give it to me, but it came in cheaper, and it's giving me equal or better statistics than their 3560s. So I can't complain. Cool. It's cheaper and is equal. I'll take it.
Yeah. Like many, I'm we've been asked to use the Cisco products. We use the small business line, 10 gigs, and the reason being is that it works with the campus enterprise plumbing, so to speak, and that they can manage it well from afar for any configurations we want. We do have our predetermined VLAN blocks and everything carved out on those. We get them in various flavors depending on PoE needs, but just the standard small business managed line from Cisco. We do have some Netgear stuff out there running AVB that's getting a little bit long in the tooth. It'll probably go away in the coming years. It'll probably go over to not be AVB when it's all said and done, but it'll most likely end up being a Cisco flavoring of some sort.
And that's primarily because it ties in with your existing campus infrastructure. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, so when I got here, so at the University of Wyoming, same sort of thing. We use Juniper switches because it ties in with the larger campus-wide infrastructure. And the Juniper switch that is the kind of the de facto, and it's standard for a general classroom space, is pretty solid. It's the EX2300 series. But the interesting thing about it is they make one, the smallest one is half rack compatible, so Larry will be happy. And it is fanless, completely fanless, which is cool until you actually push a whole bunch of network traffic over it. So once you start really cranking, if you drop those on in an NVX configuration and have that manage your NVX, it's fine for a couple of weeks until it's not fine. And there's a limited amount of memory on it, and a limited amount of backplane bandwidth available, and there's no fan. So it just horks itself, and you have to go in and physically reboot it. The other quirk with these particular line of switches, again, they're very affordable too. They're like $700 or $800 or not much, is the configuration is primarily command line based. There is a web interface, but it's very kind of basic. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but there's no shortage of network equipment manufacturers out there. So we've already started the conversation with the networking folks on campus about we need to look at some alternate options because we need something that does more than this, and we can't keep relying on this sort of thing. So right now I'm looking really hard at the Netgear managed switches that are specific for AV because they have that dual interface. If you guys haven't looked at it, it's pretty cool where you get kind of like the lightweight. It's almost like a residential style interface where it's very kind of AV technician friendly to go in and do some troubleshooting. But then there's also that other tab where if you want the full managed interface, it's still there because it's built on one of their managed lines already. So it's really interesting. And what really sold me on it was watching someone do a demo where on the fly he set up the switch to do Dante, AVB, NVX, and something else all in one shot on one like 16-port switch. And I was like, that's pretty freaking impressive. I would never do that in a space, but it's impressive to know that you can, and it was very straightforward to do. So
it's the Rosetta Stone of switches.
Those are very intriguing from a product line. The biggest deficiency they have right now, and Larry will also like this, is they do not make a half-rack version, but they have recognized, and apparently their number one request they get from people is, where's my half-rack version? So I assume that's going to be coming pretty soon. But it's a cool line of switches, so... yeah. So Justin, to your comment about, well, we're still trying to kind of figure it out. It sounds like there's a lot of options out there for you.
Oh,
so
yeah. I've suggested a few options, and I think we're hopefully maybe going to test something.
Yeah, I was going to say the next step would be to get a couple of these in and test it, but test it with your networking folks, and then try to figure out what's going to break in 3 months down the road. So
trying to get their buy-in. Got to get that buy-in.
Buy-in from the network folks.
Get them all involved.
All important. Thanks for putting up with yet another episode of AV SuperFriends On Topic. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at avsuperfriends.com.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV SuperFriends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.